Hey guys, in this tutorial we'll be learning how to create a plastic wrap effect on our objects in 3ds Max using Tyflow. To begin with, I've drawn some shapes up that will be acting as our object for the plastic wrap to wrap over. You can use any objects you want. So to start, we'll begin by drawing a geosphere located in the Create tab under the Geometry panel. So we'll draw a large sphere, a geosphere that is big enough to wrap around the objects that we're wanting to wrap, and make sure we change the segments to a high digit so that it's easier for them 3ds Max to calculate to what wrap for a detailed wrap over later on. So and make sure your objects have a high enough segments as well. In this case, all my segments are 50. I'll just delete the geosphere and pull out and hide my geosphere that I've drawn ahead. So in this case, it's this one, and then just Alt X as an example. You can see that my geosphere is wrapping over, or it's covering my objects. So turn that off, and then now we'll just begin by getting the Tyflow icon on the viewport and opening the editor. So once the editor is open, we can start by adding a birth object into the viewport, and we'll pick on our geosphere. We can right click on geosphere and hide this selection. We'll hide our geosphere so that we can get the shape of our we can see the clear effect of our wrap later on. So once that's done, we'll add another operator called the cloth bind, and we'll change our binding stiffness into 0.7 for stretch, shear as well, and then in the bend we'll change it to a lower number around 0.05. And then we'll go back into display geometry just to turn off the mark particles with no geos so that we can see the effect later on. And now we go back to cloth bind and change the binding properties lengthwise. This determines your wrap. Is it going to shrink or is it going to expand? So in this case, 1 is set as the default number. To shrink it, we'll have to go put a number below 1. So in this case, I'll put 0.5 as an example. And then now when we scroll into the timeline, we could begin to see our wrap beginning to shrink. Obviously it's not done as it's not interacting with the shapes or objects that we want to wrap over. So I'll just scroll back, and then in the Tyflow editor, we'll add an operator called surface force and pick our objects. So we pick, and then we'll press H on the keyboard. A box will pop up, and then here we'll just select all our objects that we want it to wrap over. Once that's done, down below in the traction, we'll change the force to maybe 1 millimeter. Next, we add another operator called particle physics, and we'll change the collision radius to absolute radius. And now that it looks messed up, and to do that, we'll set a number below 1 millimeter. In this case, I'll just select choose 0.2, and now that we can see it's smoother, and change the collision force friction percentage to 50%. Afterwards, we will add another operator called collision, and like before in surface force, we'll choose the objects that we wanted to wrap over. So we'll click pick and then H on the keyboard, select our objects, and then now that's done, we can begin to see our wrap is wrapping over the objects that we want. Obviously it's pretty perfect, but it's not quite perfect as it's not smooth, because you can see the creases around and it's not pretty. So in this case, we'll go back to Tyflow, the Tyflow editor, the Tyflow modifier, sorry, and then under particle bind solver setting steps, we'll change it to maybe, for an example, we'll set 20. Now that you can see the wrap being smoother, and then additionally change the time step frame to half a frame. And then now that it's getting a lot smoother, we can see it's almost there, but not quite there yet, because we can see the wrap going into our object. So to solve this issue, we go back to the Tyflow editor in collision. Under the absolute radius here, we'll change the radius to perhaps 0.2. And then now that you can see it's sort of wrapping over our object quite nicely. For a better view, like a transparent view of what we're going for, press Alt-X on your keyboard. You can see that it's wrapping over our objects quite nicely, with the exception of this. So in this case, maybe we could just change the number to slightly higher. And then now that it's wrapped quite nicely around our objects, this is the effects that we're going for. Now that you're ready to render, and before you render, make sure you add the mesh operator before you actually render. So now that's effects done, you're ready to render. Now we pull out the material editor. And then for a transparent effect, this is my settings that I've created. Change the max depth to 2, and then we'll click reflect something white. And make sure you have Fresnel reflections on. And then refract is set to white as a gray color tone. Okay, maybe not self-illumination. And now that you could drag it over your Tyflow editor. So additionally, you can change the material. So we'll just turn off our Tyflow to change the materials of our sphere objects. And in this case, I'll just drag one randomly. And then turn on our Tyflow. And then in this case, I'll just turn on my plane and the V-ray lightings that I've set it. Just move that in there. And then now you're ready to render. So just a quick one is just to choose the viewport IPR. Now that it's rendering, you're free to change the outcome, but you're free to change all the materials and the effects of your plastic wrap. Yeah, that's the end of this tutorial. Thank you.